Generation cycles, civilization cycles for the U.S. I'm Rich Paz for Critical Point, March 13, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time. This is part two of a presentation that'll have three, maybe four parts. I think the next part's going to be more about the stock market and economy. This one's going to be more upbeat. Part one was about the destruction and negativity and the death of the U.S. and then rebirth. And now we want to talk about rebirth, but I still got to go over some things to get you up to speed here, especially if you haven't seen part one. All right, looking at this table here, or chart, generations plus stock market economy models entangle society and humanity. What we have is what I call the SC1 from the 1780s to 2020s. This does relate to civilization work by others. It contains 12 U.S. citizen generations. And what we're doing today is basically destroying, or at the very least aggressively modifying, what we have accomplished from 1780s, okay? Now, that pattern breaks into three sets of four generations, and this can dovetail to the generation discovered by Strauss and Howe in a book that was written in 1997, The Fourth Turning. However, I've also discovered this on my own, and then I've discovered it really first in the stock market and economy, and then said, gee, it must have something to do with a nation, with people as well. So the first phase went from a Revolutionary War to the Civil War. Second phase, Civil War to World War II, including the 1930s Depression. And then the third phase, 1940s to today. Well, the 1940s today is really about the U.S. taking over the world, being the leader of the world. But we're now breaking that down. We're now tearing that down. So we're modifying or aggressively changing or even destroying what we've accomplished from 1940s. And there's four generations doing that process. Now, when we divide this out into halves, we come up with an SC3. And the 1940s and 1980s with Generation 1 and 2, and they created the U.S. being the leader of the world. The stock market did very well, and I will discuss that in part three. Now, the second phase, and this is kind of like a yin-yang, the second phase was Generation 3 and 4, 1980s to 2020s. And what we find is people were optimistic in the 80s and 90s that the Reaganomics, President Reagan, the Republicans, the get-rich, trickle-down idea was all going to work and it was great and wonderful. And then from the 2000s to today, people are quite pessimistic, very unhappy, and they feel like the system didn't work. And so we can divide this 1980 2020s into Generation 3, 1980 2000s, then Generation 4, 2000s to 2020s, and these are called SC4s, okay? Now, or I should say, I'm sorry, this one is, these are called SC4s, but this one is Generation 4, that one's Generation 3. Now, Generation 4 is always a crisis. We behave terribly, horribly. We're in the death phase. And it just links to all these larger patterns, like it's a confluence of many different things all coming once, a great storm, okay? The good news is we're going to pull out of that, okay? So I want to go back to the SC1 and discuss that really the middle class, in terms of a portion of the population, expanded, grew, more people in the middle class from about 6, 8, 10% back in the year 1800 to about 30% in the Gilded Age, which is what President Trump wants us to relive, okay? Then it went all the way up into the 1970s, where I believe it got up to like 70%. The better increase in the percent middle class was really from World War II to 1970s, and that's when we had labor unions, that's when we had taking care of people as well as business, more community kind of behavior there, and Generation 1 and 2, okay? Now, we can also do the same thing with the percent of the middle class of the U.S. GDP. It also went up from about 6% to maybe about 60%. And then, however, from the 1980s, 2020s, it declined. The whole President Reagan and conservative and Republican thing and get richer, gets richer idea didn't work. We lost people in the middle class. Now, some became rich, some became poor. Okay. Now, we also lost the amount of portion of income or earnings, or maybe just say it, portion of the economy the middle class lost some of that, and that's probably the more significant problem right now. So it does prove inequality. Now, I pulled this from AI to see if it could find similar things that I was thinking of, and this is what it put out along with many other things. But yeah, it was saying everything got better for the middle class from 1800 into the 1970s. From 1970s to now, things did not go so well. Now, if we look at consumer sentiment, you may find some happy type indicators. Gallup polls have something like that. What I learned is from 1980 to the end of the 1990s, consumer sentiment rose. And this is really generation 3, and this is where we brought in financialization, globalization, rentierism, where we never really own anything, obsolescence, which means we make sure things break down, or if you buy software, you have to buy additional software, and it won't even work. So it's really a rigged system, and yet we gave it a chance. We were optimistic that things could do better. And then President Clinton, a Democrat, was actually more Republican, especially on the economy side of things. And we had a great stock market. But from 2000 now, notice consumer sentiment came down. We do find under Obama, it went up in his second term quite well. And then when Trump came in, it stopped going up. It went down. Of course, we had COVID, what partially explains that. But then Biden come in, rebounded a little bit, and then it's back down again on Trump. And notice we had Democrat and Republicans, and yet the American people are unhappy with all of them. They're unhappy with this system. We are in the Generation 4 crisis, and hopefully it's going to bottom soon. Now, this is a chart of percent GDP from the year 1800, green line, and things have calmed down compared to the way it was in the 1800s. This blue line is the nominal GDP per capita in dollars, so it's telling what the economy is worth in dollars. Well, if you were to chart how much money we printed from 1980 to now, it looks similar to this economy. It just goes straight up. We printed gargantuan sums of money. Now, the thing is, as we printed that, the economy became worth more. What that means is we printed that money, we show it as debt, but it's really not debt. It's printed money. And that printed money goes right into the money supply that you and I use, the business and people, okay? So it was just printed money being pumped right in to make the economy bigger. The problem is from 1980 to now, the economy's averaged 2.8% growth. When you look at 1980 back to 50s, 40s, 30s, it was 4.1 or higher percent growth. It's kind of like driving a car at 60 miles an hour in speed control and then you put it down to 40. That doesn't make for happy U.S. citizens, especially middle class and poor. Rich are happy with it. What it tells us, all this printed money didn't work. Why did it not work? It goes into Banker Street, Wall Street, and does not come back out into the middle class and poor. It goes into the rich and does not come back as well. It goes abroad, and some of it comes back, but it tends to go right back to the rich, not the middle class and poor. And so I began to think that really the middle class and poor went into a depression in the 1980s. But if we throw in that consumer sentiment, really the better statement is from the 1780s, instead of the U.S. peaking in 1980, getting too old, it actually peaked in the 1990s and then just declined from 2000s to 2020s. And I'm showing that in here, and then I'm breaking it down into these generations. But here's the optimistic part of this video. We're going to have Generation 1 going higher in the 2040s, maybe even higher in the 2050s. In the next part 3, I will discuss how high is the stock market going? How good is it going to do in the next 30 years? But we also want to discuss how do we get started on this? All right, so this is what's going on. I'm thinking in 2026 to 2034, we're going to put an end to this crisis. It's going to have to involve a president who's strong and powerful, and now the president has more power than ever. So if we can get someone else that can actually do some good, if they're willing to seize that power and not be a goody two-shoe and say, oh, I'm not going to do that. If we can really go, we can go early and have a really good boom period in economy and happier Americans in the 2030s to 2040s, okay? So we got to watch the political side of this, but we also need the movement. We need the people. The bad crisis period is really baby boomers and Gen Xers. We need more of the millennials, Gen Zers stepping up, okay? So next, what I want to look at is we want to consider baby boomer and Gen Xers. They caused this crisis generation, and we now can increasingly blame it on Gen Xers. And you have to blame it on Democrats and Republicans, but you have to blame it even more on more of the Republican side, I believe. Now, the millennials and Gen Zers are 6% of Congress population. They are 60% of the U.S. population, so they are very underrepresented. They are more likely going to be the heroes that are going to put something together here for this Gen 1 or in the 2030s and 40s to rebuild the country and to go on to better days. What might that include? I say Medicare for all, and we even have billionaire think tanks that say, and they're more Republican think tanks, say Medicare for all would be good for business and the people, therefore the country. There are major universities saying the same, but they also have done additional analysis and claim it will save lives. We also have to work on minimum wage or go to basic income or even universal basic income, get it up there. And the good news is we can print money for that because we are really in an MMT system that I will discuss in a future podcast as well. We can print all the money we want. The government won't go broke. It's just a matter of what do you do with that money? How well do you use it? Okay? It's not a matter, you shouldn't worry over the debt. You worry over the debt of people and businesses. Don't worry over the debt of the government. But at the same time, we have a right and an obligation to say, what are we printing that money? How do we make it work? We can print this money at 0% interest and pump it right into a minimum wage basic income program. You can then raise the minimum wage on business slowly, and you slowly reduce the government's input, the money going into those people accounts, and eventually you've switched over to a national minimum wage. But you could also just print that money forever and tell businesses they can't lower their minimum wage, but they don't necessarily have to come up to the national minimum wage. And then you just print that money forever, 0% interest. All right, next we can print money and put it into individual retirement accounts. Put in a little less than $100,000 for a 20-year-old minus whatever they already have in retirement. For all those that are younger, all the way down to newborns, for a newborn you might get by with just $2,000 to $5,000 you put in, but you put in more every year. But if they're making money, that means you can put in less. So by the time they're 20 years old, the tax we didn't put in the money would have at the 20-year-old starting now. So in other words, the system becomes cheaper to work on those younger generations. Above 20, we can scale it all the way up to $2 million by the time they retire. And at retirement age, you might actually want to make it as just an additional program inside of Social Security, make it more of a pension. But for everybody else, make them put that money into the stock market, make them learn how to do that. And when they also get that minimum wage basic income, they should take a little quiz on how to pay down debt, run a checkbook, and make them aware. They may never get another raise in the future. Have them get caught up. And that's what these individual retirement accounts, they need more money to get caught up. The stock market is so high priced, you can't buy the amount of stocks you used to with the older generations did, okay? Now, save Social Security. We can just tax the rich and make it work forever. We can even lower the tax rate somewhat on everybody, but make the rich pay in. It can go on forever. And the government needs to announce and say that. The government needs to come out and say they'll have our back, that even if that doesn't work by making the rich pay, the government will simply print the money at 0% interest, have the Social Security there. I think we need a national education program, but we need to copy another country. We're too messed up people right now. We got too many things to fix. Copy someone else, do it, pay for it from local taxes all the way up to federal taxes. And if we get in dire straits, print the money, 0% interest. And at least when we do print money for some of these, it could be a red flag. How do we then lower costs so we don't have to keep doing that? All right, now, so I've explained the millennials and Gen Zers. And this is time to get going, and we got to be working on this by 2035. If I don't see a big significant change, I'm going to get worried we will be robbed of how good the 2030s and 40s can be, and that could even set us back for the rest of this century. We can even screw this up to have a lost century while China becomes the leader of the world, and they do that for that cyclically, but that doesn't mean we can't be just as happy and just as prosperous, okay? That's it for part 2. Part 3, we'll look more at the stock market and economy performance and a few other things. And thank you for watching my little podcast on patterns and cycles of civilization, people, economy, and stock market.